of us getting on stream.
Thank you, Kevin.
We are live and in color. Over to you, Del.
Okay, so I will call the, and I'd like to say good afternoon to all those that are watching the first live stream of the TCHC Building Investment Finance and Audit Committee meeting. Welcome. I'm Adele Emery, and I am chair of BIFAC. And in light of the need for social distancing, we are holding this committee meeting online. So I would like to begin with the acknowledgement of the land that each of us is sitting on as we hold this virtual meeting is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa. Could I ask, if you're not speaking, could I ask if you could mute just so we don't have the rustling of the papers? And is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As was the case with our May 20th BIFAC meeting, we are conducting this meeting virtually, and we are using an online platform which provides for continued effective governance and decision-making. As I mentioned, this is the first meeting that will be live streamed. None of the committee members are in the same room because we are continuing to practice physical distancing to limit the spread of COVID-19. During the public session, there will be several items that are brought forward for the committee members' approval. They include an update on the Leslie Nymark rental construction budget, mortgage renewal with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, several major contract awards that require BIFAC approval, the approval of a 50-year lease at 389 Church, and the charters for BIFAC and the Procurement Awards Committee. Before we start the meeting, I would like to reiterate the board's support for TCHC's frontline staff who are in our buildings, offices, and communities across the city, working under challenging conditions to provide essential service and support to tenants, as well as our employees who continue to work from home to keep the business running. Toronto Community Housing is doing its part to support the city's efforts to protect public health. And on behalf of the board, I would like to thank everyone at the company for stepping up during these extraordinary times. And I thank you for all your efforts and for living our values and putting our tenants first. It's so important. So I will explain some of the special procedures that we propose to follow during today's meeting. I don't think we have any deputations today. Can I confirm that?
That's correct.
Okay, but in light of COVID and the ongoing need for social distancing, TCHC is holding today's meeting virtually, as I mentioned. And as I said, it's the first live streaming and will allow for live deputations from members of the public. But as mentioned, we did not hear for any of any deputations required. And I think that's it. I would request that any committee members who wish to either question staff in relation to a matter on today's agenda, use your chat function within the WebEx application to signal to the board secretary that you would like to speak. I think given the size of our committee, I can pretty well see everyone. So I think if you just raise your hand, that will also will work. And voting, I think we will show a raise of hands to vote on each item. And to assist in this process, we ask that all committee members ensure that their cameras are on and request staff participating in the meeting to ensure that their cameras are turned off during the voting process, so that the secretary can clearly see the show of hands. And if a committee member requests that we do so, we will vote on items as required using a voice vote, in which I will ask committee members individually to indicate whether they either support or oppose the recommendation that is before the committee by indicating that they approve or oppose. So with that done, I will now look at the public consent agenda items and ask if there are any requests to move any of the consent items out of the consent agenda. Okay, perfect. And could I ask the members of the BIFAC to indicate if they have any interest on any of the items on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. I have a motion to approve the public agenda. Brian, thank you. Could I have a seconder?
Nick.
Anna? All in favor?
To Amanda, Nick Smith, Nick McRae, Brian Smith, and Councillor Bylaw, and Amanda Coombs. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So you're okay with that vote, Dara?
The motion is adopted unanimously.
So we will move on to item number 3, which is the Leslie construction budget update. And I will turn it over to Vincent, our Chief Development Officer.
Great. So I will take the report as read. So what we're seeking from BIFAC today is approval of an updated business plan for Leslie Nymark with sources of funds of $37.3 million and costs of $60.4 million. This is an increase of about $9.4 million from the previous board approval in 2018. Leslie Nymark is a revitalization in North York, just northwest of Leslie and Shepherd. It's 121 rental replacement units and about 500 market condo units. We've been partnered with our developer partner, Tridel, on this project since 2010, and we're slated to, we're anticipating completion of the rental portion in about 2022. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Vincent?
It's Nick McRae. In terms of the costs going forward, Vincent, can you just confirm what percentage of the total budget is now fixed and locked in as it relates to any potential future increases?
Sure. So through the chair, 94% of the project is now tendered, and 90% of the work on the 6 off-site replacement units at Allenbury Gardens has also been tendered. You know, the risk of costs increasing any further has been mitigated from the fact that the majority of the projects has already been tendered and those prices have been locked in. I will also point out that we still have about 1.7% or $850,000 in contingency left on this project. And we've also added in a $340,000 contingency for any COVID related issues that may arise due to physical distancing and a slower progress in construction.
Small question on the development charges on page 18 of the total package. It notes an increase in development charges brackets $5 million. Is the increase is $5 million? And if so, that strikes me. What were the total development charges? It strikes me as quite a high increase, and it mentions there's a possibility they may be reimbursed. Did I read that correctly? And how would that work?
Yeah, so this was brought forward to BIFAC, I believe, in 2018 when we brought forward the original business plan. We had identified this as a risk to the board that at the time we brought forward the budget, we may or may not have made it or pulled permits in time to avoid the City of Toronto's increase in development charges. Unfortunately, we weren't able to pull the permits in time, and so we're subject to the increase that came into effect in 2018. So then there was a member's motion that was presented at City Council that requested that the city reimburse TCHC for any increase, or its share of the increase in development charges through the budget process. And then that was, it was seconded by Deputy Mayor Bailao. Then through the budget process, it was identified that since the final impact to TCHC wouldn't be realized until 2021, when profits are distributed on this project, that would be the time when TCHC should seek a reimbursement for its share of the development charge increase through the budget process. And that was a member's motion, or sorry, that was an amendment to the 2019 budget package at the city from Councillor Carroll. So that directs the city to work with TCHC through the 2021 budget process to reimburse TCHC. So the total development charges on the project are $15.4 million.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Vincent? Vincent, can I just ask if there is any risk around the city funding? I'm just thinking about the impact that COVID-19's had on the city and their finances.
So from my understanding is the development capital is not at risk. From what our understanding is that they will provide the total amounts that they had committed through the 2018 and 2019 budget process.
Okay, thank you.
Adele?
Brian?
Question. With regards to the contracts you've already, what's the likelihood of there being change orders related to COVID-19 on those contracts?
It's still too early to say. From our understanding on site, there hasn't been a significant delay through the COVID period. Construction continues to happen, albeit a little bit slower, just given physical distancing on things like elevators and the enhanced cleaning measures that are required on site. So right now we built in that $340,000 contingency, which is Tridel, our developer partner's best guess at this time, but we haven't seen much of an impact as of yet.
Has there been any on any of the work across the portfolio that we've seen change orders test or had the waters tested for change orders for any projects that we're doing for COVID-19?
We anticipate that there may be some increases on the development side of things, on the new construction side. We've been working with our developer partners to pull together those numbers. We have had, for example, Lawrence Heights was shut down for several days due to COVID, and there was an impact to one of the market buildings in Regent Park, where they had to clean the entire market building, and so those cleaning costs have had an impact. But in terms of the rental costs, it's too early to tell yet. We haven't had any significant impact, so we're working with our partners to kind of project what we think those costs may be.
So, and are those costs being shared proportionately with our development partners?
So where we have, I mean, once we start receiving what those costs may be, obviously we will work with our partners to validate those costs. You know, depending on what we feel is reasonable. You know, some of it would be the onus is on the developer partner to ensure that the site is safe. You know, and so, but then some other costs are just costs that you know, are just that we'll have to absorb.
Thank you.
Vincent, can you remind me, what is the contingency that you have in this Leslie Narmark budget for COVID? You mentioned that earlier.
340,000.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Vincent? Okay, hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the recommendations in this report? Nick, thank you. Brian, I'll second. Could I have a show of hands, all in favor?
I see votes in favor from Brian Smith, Adele Emery, Nick McRae, Amanda Coombs, Councillor Bylaw. The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sarah. If we could move on to item number 4, the August 2020 mortgage renewal with CMHC. And I'm going to turn it over to Roseanne, our CFO.
So item 4 is the August 2020 mortgage renewal. So this is I'll take the report as read. This is for the existing 10-year mortgage for 2 municipal addresses, and the mortgage is coming up for renewal on August 1st. So we are seeking approval for proceeding with the renewal for approximately $11.3 million. We'll be looking for a 98-month term renewal. If that is not available, we'll be going for the 5-year term. So it's not the full 10 years because 98 months is approximately 8 years where we will be fully paid off. So seeking approval for proceeding with this renewal. It's a standard, it's our straightforward annual renewals.
Are there any questions for Roseanne? Okay. Could I have a motion to approve the renewal of the CMHC mortgages?
Nick and Councillor Bylaw. So Councillor Bylaw, if you can move it, and Mr. McRae, if you can second.
Perfect. Thank you. And could I have a show of hands, all in favor?
So Chair Emery, Mr. McRae, Councillor Bylaw, Brian Smith, Mr. Smith, and Ms. Coombs. In favor, the motion passes unanimously.
Perfect. Thank you, Dara. We will move on to item number 5, which is the facility management reports. So there are 3 facility management reports, and I am going to turn this over to the Vice President, Facilities Management, Alan.
Thank you, Adele. I do have a short presentation that just outlines all of the information on these 3 awards. So with your approval, I'll put that on the screen.
Thank you.
I'm going to leave it in this mode given the issue we had with Vincent when it went into presentation mode. So,
Okay.
So the first award that we have is a direct award for elevator maintenance service contracts at 10 locations with Schindler Canada. The award's for $892,500 for 16 elevators at 10 buildings over a 5-year term. And it is broken up between preventive maintenance services, which are the required services that we must perform on elevators to make sure we're compliant, as well as for up to, so an upset limit of $300,000 for demand repairs on an as-needed basis. The reasons for recommendation for this direct award is, as I mentioned, these are services that we need to provide on these elevators to ensure that we're compliant and that they're working properly for our tenants. These are proprietary elevators, so Schindler is the only vendor able to perform the service on the elevator. And we have consolidated the contracts so that they're easier to manage, and also we see a little bit of a cost savings by doing that. Schindler is currently the elevator maintenance service provider for these buildings. We did have little issues at one particular building with Schindler, but we have worked with them to address any of these issues, and they have been rectified, and we've been seeing solid performance from Schindler at this time. So we would like to request approval for this award.
Are there any questions for Alan regarding the Schindler Award?
It's Nick here. Quick question. I understand, Schindler's obviously uniquely positioned to service them given the nature of the equipment, and that's sort of the nature of the elevator industry. How are we comfortable? How are we ensuring pricing is appropriate? Is it a function of across the portfolio we're able to see pricing from various vendors, elevator vendors, to ensure the pricing is appropriate and market-based?
Correct. Yes, we have a number of elevator contracts with different service providers, so we know that we're getting reasonable pricing for the service being provided.
It's Brian. Do we track the number of days out of service for our elevators?
We do get a report where we know if we have elevators that are out of service. It is hard to track exactly, though, how many. We get reports on the number of service calls, so we don't actually, which may or may not result in an elevator being out of service. So we don't, at this time, have that information. We are looking, though, at monitoring software for where we can put it in at buildings. And assuming we're able to get that installed at various buildings, then that would give us that type of information for the buildings where we're able to install it.
Thank you.
Alan, might I suggest, just since you have the screen, that you go through your presentations and take questions on all items, and then like all three of the items that you want to discuss, and then Dara can take put the motions up on the screen for each individual item as they go through, as opposed to you guys dropping back and forth and sharing screens.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just ask what the increase is between the old contract and the new contract for Schindler?
We're actually seeing a little bit of a savings because we're combining them. So we're seeing about, it's $6,000, so it's basically the same.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, so if we want to move on to item B.
Thank you, Adele. This is for the combined heat and power chip, as it's referred to, at 16 locations. You may recall that there was an award that was approved previously for 24 locations. So these are the remaining 16 locations, 2 awards combined into the one contract award for $18 million each. This is approval we're looking at for a full 20-year term of operating maintenance, which includes the cost for the design, build, and the operate and maintain for 20 years. So this is looking at a total complete cost. TCHC would commit to operating and maintaining for the first 7 years. The remaining 13 years, we would take a look at it at that time after the first 7 years. Recommendations. So the combined heat and power system allows for sustainable occupancy in the buildings where it's installed. So this means in the event of a power outage or like ice storm, something like that, where power is cut, these buildings would be able to operate and our tenants would be able to remain in place and still have the necessities of electricity, running water, heat, things like that. This system will also replace existing emergency diesel generators that we have that are currently require replacement. And the system also uses the waste heat that it produces to generate heat, or is used to heat the building, which helps offset costs. The buildings were selected in combination with Toronto Hydro and also looking at with the independent electricity service operator. So on February the 13th, 2018, approved a recommendation to proceed with that system. Then on April the 11th, approved a recommendation to proceed with a $38 million loan from the city to finance the capital costs. And then on September the 12th, the board approved the award to Ecosystems for the first 24 locations. And then these remaining 16 locations, we're looking to approve the award to JTS. On the previous award, Ecosystems submitted the best net present value. They didn't have the capacity to complete all of the groups that were sent out, so that's why we went back out to tender for groups 1 and 3 for the remaining 16 locations, which is what you're seeing today. You'll see that JTS Mechanical submitted the highest net present value. The net present value has been discounted at a rate of 4% as per what the interest rate is on the loan, and they met all of our mandatory requirements. The system, once installed and running, will save TCHC $23.3 million in utility cost savings. Net capital costs, $17.9 million. There is also an incentive that is currently set at expiring on December the 31st. We put in the offer that if the vendor was able to have these systems installed by December the 31st to take advantage of the incentive, that the vendor would be entitled to 50%, and then TCHC would get the remaining 50%. We know that that timeline is very tight, so we did do all of our calculations with and without receiving the incentive, and without receiving the incentive, we still come in at the IRR that we're looking for. We are also working with the province in light of COVID and the other things going on, is to see if we can get an extension to that date of December the 31st. And if we do get an extension, then that would, that would be wonderful for us. But if we don't get the extension, then the business case is still sound for the approval of these awards.
Sorry, Alan, we're not hearing you, or at least I'm not.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Alan,
Yes, I don't think we
heard you through the entire thing. Are you okay? Adele, are you still hearing us well?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay. Were you able to hear me now, Adele?
Yes, I am.
Oh, I'm not sure what happened there. Where would you like me to go back to?
I think it was just the last slide.
Okay, it was just around that we are working with the province to see if we can extend the deadline. If we do, then that would be great because we can hopefully take advantage of that incentive. However, as I mentioned earlier, if we're not able to get the deadline for that incentive extended, the business case is still sound without having any of that incentive.
And the 24 locations are on track to still meet that. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any questions for Alan regarding the new heat and power? Brian?
Brian, you're muted.
You're muted, Brian. Did you?
I think I'm there now. I was wondering in terms of the incentive, how it was determined that it should be 50-50 split with the with the company, and especially if we get an extension, obviously, I can understand it's an incentive to get the job done, for rewarding the company for getting it done by the end of December. But I just wondered whether, I mean, it's what, almost $4.5 million they would receive. Is that correct?
Yes.
And whether we're giving away too much.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just say, obviously money is tight, and I hate to, I'm sure there's lots of places we could use it.
In looking at the deadline, we wanted to ensure that we incentivized people to award or to look at bidding on this. And with December 31st, honestly, is going to be pretty much impossible for somebody, but we did want to have a good incentive there for them to be eager to bid on the work. And we did get some good bids on the work, and that's why we decided to structure it that way.
And if the province or IESO says they would allow you to extend it to March 31st, for example, would they still get the 50%?
Yes, they would.
Okay, well, I'm not happy, but I understand it's in the contract.
So you'd like it to be, if it was extended to March, you'd like it to be, 25% they receive.
Yeah, some.
Not as tight.
Yeah. But,
I'm presuming,
not,
Alan, we presume, Alan, that it's too late to make any kind of adjustment like that?
We would have to go out with a new tender.
Okay.
And the idea being that since these are large, complex projects, and that it's the provincial government that is offering the incentive, that we thought it was appropriate, in the spirit of partnership, that we share the incentive, because these are the people that have to do all the heavy lifting, and essentially we get the benefit of them expediting the heavy lifting. The extra costs for delivering the project within the incentive timeframe are really all for the supplier and no cost for us. So it's really found money for us if we can get them to do it. So that's why the incentive is as high as it is.
Are there any other questions for Alan on item B? Alan, can I just confirm that this was within your budget?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Okay. If there are no other questions on 5B, if you could move on to 5C, the lease for church.
Thank you. So we're seeking approval. 389 Church is a property that originally had been intended to be transferred to the city, where they have asked us to perform extensive renovations. Basically, we're gutting the building and redoing the entire building. We've been asked to change the transfer to become a lease for a term of 50 years less a day, and rent in the amount of $25,000 payable on the commencement date. Reason for the recommendation for the city direction, it's recommended the building be leased to a not-for-profit housing provider to operate and maintain affordable housing and provide support services to the tenants. I know that the city has issued their RFP to find that service provider that they're looking for. The tenants will be, for terms of the lease, the tenants will be selected by the city. The tenant will be responsible for all realty taxes, maintenance, insurance, and capital repairs. And to facilitate the capital repairs, the tenant will establish a reserve fund based on a building condition assessment or 5% of all rents. We are also required to receive consent to proceed with the lease by Cmhc per the National Co-Investment Fund Agreement. As I mentioned, we were working with the city on a transfer of this 13-story building that was underutilized and is currently vacant. The building is currently under renovation. On December the 11th, 2017, the board did approve the renovation and directed TCHC to arrange for construction financing for the renovation and to transfer the property to a supportive housing provider upon completion of the project. On December the 6th, 2018, the board approved and recommended spending authority of $34,600,000 budget for the renovation. In terms of the lease agreement, the tenant will make an upfront payment to TCHC in the amount of $25 million as rent under the lease. This will be used to repay TCHC for the $20 million in construction financing, including approximately $500,000 in accumulated interest, and then the balance will be paid back to the city to reimburse their capital funding costs. Homes for Good funding will cover $17,850,000 in mortgage payments, and the contribution agreement will be assigned to the not-for-profit housing provider on the lease commencement date. We're looking for your approval for the execution of this lease agreement.
Could I ask if there are any questions for Alan regarding this 50-year lease?
Yeah, this is Amanda speaking, when will the renovations be finished?
They'll be finished in October of this year, is what the construction schedule currently is.
What are the actual costs? You showed a budget from 2018 for $34 million. What are the actual costs?
I'd have to get an exact total for that. I'll find it out for you.
Okay, and so we had construction financing at $20 million, and we financed the rest. How?
The city has agreed to fund the entire renovation cost.
Okay, so it's coming from the city.
So part through the 20 million and part through the federal funding?
It's all through, we've got all funding through the city.
Yeah, it's actually not through the federal funding, Brian, is through the Homes for Good program.
Okay. Would all the units be RGI units?
I believe they will.
Brian, it's Sheila. The city's issuing a tender now to find a service provider with the intention that they'll be made available to women who are experiencing homelessness.
And Brian, just to kind of put this in context, this is a bit like the scattered homes, so this is another building that, we're going to maintain ownership of, but we're essentially transferring the operation of it out of the portfolio.
I understand that. I guess I'm assuming if they're going to take on the operations, they would be concerned about the funding. So I'm assuming they would be RGI units, especially for that population.
Yeah, I presume so, but I don't know exactly, that it is a use that the city has decided, in terms of how they want to allocate it. So it's going to be coming out of presumably, Juliana's team, under her umbrella.
Okay.
But it is not-for-profit housing.
Yes.
Oh, I certainly understand that. I'm just was trying to think how they're going to pay for it. Whoever the nonprofit is.
So Alan, you're asking us to approve these terms, but you don't have a tenant yet, or the city doesn't have a tenant yet. Are these terms negotiable, or does the prospective tenant have to accept them as is?
You're correct that there isn't a tenant. The city has issued the RFP, but it was issued just recently. In terms of negotiating the terms, Sarah, you might be able to answer that question better than myself.
City's built the terms into the RFP.
The terms that the board is being asked to approve today are built into the city's RFP document. So any social agency that is submitting a proposal to assume management of the building will, through the RFP process, be agreeing to these terms.
Okay, so they're not negotiable. And I guess the gap between the 25 million and the $17 million mortgage, that will be provided by the not-for-profit. And
That's correct.
That's correct.
okay, and that's a reasonable expectation that they have that available.
So,
and just in the, so to kind of put this in context, the city is backstopping us 100% on this project, so that we're whole. That's the intent of it. How they actually engineer the fine tuning of that will obviously depend on who responds and how they respond and what deal, but relative to TCHC, we're being made whole.
Okay, perfect.
And that's what the design of this is to do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, are there any other questions for Alan in regards to this 389 Church Street lease? Okay, hearing none. Dara, will we go back to item 5A and I ask approval on that?
I'm going to bring that motion back up. So this is the motion that was in the report to the board in relation to 5A. If we can have a mover and a seconder.
I have someone motion to approve the recommendation. Brian, can I have a seconder? I don't actually see anybody else.
Yeah. Nick's hand was up. I saw that.
Okay, there. He's on the second screen. Thank you, Nick. And a vote, all in favor? Show.
So I see the chair, I see Councillor Bilau, I see Nick McRae and Brian Smith, and Amanda, I'm not sure why, but I can't see you on my screen. Can I have your vote?
I vote in favor.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously in relation to the motion before the board in relation to item 5A. I'm going to bring up the motion for item 5B. All right. This is the CHIP motion.
So could I ask if someone could move to approve the recommendations in this report? Amanda?
I can see Amanda if moving it, and can I have a seconder? I see Mr. McRae. So the motion is before the board, and members indicate whether they support or are opposed to the motion. You want to indicate by show of hands support? I see Chair Emery, I see Ms. Coombs, Mr. Smith, Councillor Bilau, and Mr. McRae.
Yep, see everybody.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And can we move on to item number C, the 50-year lease?
Let me share the motion just so that members can see that. That's all right.
Could I have someone move to approve the recommendation in this report?
I see Anna's hand up, and I saw Brian's hand up.
And perfect. Anna is moving and Brian is seconding. And could I have a show of hands for all those in favor? of this motion?
To the chair, to Mr. Smith, in favor, Councillor Bailao, Mr. McCray, and Ms. Gross. That's unanimous.
Passes. Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
Yes, thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 6, the termite treatment services. And I will turn this over to our COO, Sheila.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report is for termite treatment services for prevention, elimination, and monitoring of termite activity on TCH property. It is for a 5-year term, 3 years with the possibility of 2 one-year extensions. The award is based on unit pricing and an estimate of the amount of service that will be required over that time period. So the award is to Termagard for up to $6 million for termite management over a 5-year period.
Are there any questions for Sheila on the termite prevention plan? Brian? I think you're on mute, Brian.
No, I just wanted to know what our experience historically had been.
So the pricing and the approach in this report is based on our past experience, along with some forecasting of what's happening with termite activity across the city. There are some pockets of the city where termite growth is increasing, and we want to be prepared to address that.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, just a quick question. Have we worked with this company before?
Yes, we have.
I'm assuming that was taken into consideration as we chose. It was part of their evaluation, their record, right?
That's correct.
Are there other questions? Sheila, can I just ask a clarification? I thought when I was reading it, there was almost a year between the time that the RFP went out and this request to award the contract. Was I right?
So the public RFP was issued, you're correct, last July, closed last August. It took some time for us to review. We've also come through a pretty significant restructuring and COVID. So it has taken us some time to get our kind of basic contract awards lined up again, but we are well down that path now.
Okay, so a delay like that, that's unusual, not common?
That's correct.
Okay, and the prices haven't changed in that period?
No, they've held to the pricing that, the unit pricing that was presented in the in-camera session.
Okay, and the total includes the 5 years, the full 5 years?
3 years plus the possibility of 2 one-year extensions.
Perfect. Okay. Are there any other questions for Sheila? Okay, could a motion to approve the contract for the termite treatment services? Amanda, could I have a seconder? Brian? Could I have a show of hands for all those in favor?
I see vote in favor from the chair, Ms. Imrie, Mr. Smith, Ms. Coombs, and Mr. McCray, and Councillor Bailao. Yes, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So we will move on to our last item, which is item number 7, and it is a review of the charters for the for BIFAC and for the Procurement Awards Committee. And so I'm going to turn this over to Dara.
This report is further to a report that was considered by the Governance, Communications, and Human Resources Committee in January of this year, proposing to review and make revisions to the charters of the board and its committees as part of the process through which the board regularly reviews the charters for its own governance and those of its committees. The timing of the report was such that by the time governance had considered the revisions to the various charters, BIFAC had met for that meeting cycle, and this is the first opportunity that the committee has had to consider the revisions that are being proposed to its charter and those of the Procurement Awards Committee since that date, given the disruption that's occurred to our meeting cycle as a result of COVID. The change primarily that is contemplated to the BIFAC charter is a very limited, you'll see it's changing one word, capitalizing the word management in the report. So no significant change in the nature of the charter for the BIFAC committee. In the Procurement Awards Committee charter, the changes that are being proposed are clarification of the existing scope of authority for the Procurement Awards Committee, providing greater clarity as to how the committee is authorized to make awards for commitments on behalf of TCHC and the limits of that authority. Specifically, the changes do not increase the authority of the Procurement Awards Committee to make awards of commitments beyond its existing financial limits without further approval by BIFAC or the board. The language is intended to provide greater clarity as to how that committee functions.
Are there any questions for Dara?
It's Brian.
Yes?
Did you have a question, Brian?
Yes, I can't see whether I'm, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, Brian.
I'm just wondering, in terms of the amount, what has been the experience over the past year or 2 years in terms, is that still applicable to 2.5?
I will say we considered whether or not it was appropriate to increase the authority of the Procurement Awards Committee to make awards of commitments on behalf of TCHC. I think ultimately our decision was that, especially at this point in time, the better course of action was to continue with the existing financial authority of the Procurement Awards Committee and elevate to BIFAC and the board commitments on behalf of TCHC that exceeded that amount. You can see that we have, in our recent experience, brought a number of reports to this committee and to the board that have exceeded the BIFAC authority level or the PAC authority level at the last virtual meeting. And that, in part, I think it's a function of the fact that COVID had disrupted our meeting cycle for a time. If today's agenda gives us any indication, we are here with 3 reports that exceed the PAC authority limit that we're asking the committee to approve, which is not an excessive number of reports to be bringing to this committee or to the board's attention. I think the limits for now we can continue to operate under.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dara? Okay, hearing none. Excuse me. Could I have a motion to approve the BIFAC charter and the Procurement Awards Committee? Brian, can I ask you to move that?
Sure, I'm a bit reticent, mainly because it would come to governance, but I don't mind moving it. I agree with it.
Oh, I thought it had been through governance.
To clarify, this amendment to the charter has already been approved by the governance committee, and with the BIFAC approval today, it will then go to the board meeting on June 24th for the board's approval as well.
Okay, thanks, Darren. So I'll move that.
Okay, I thought it had been through governance. Could I have a seconder, please? Nick? Did you raise your hand?
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
Perfect, thank you. Could I have a show of hands for all those in favor?
So I see the chair, I see Ms. Coombs, Mr. Smith, Mr. McCray, and Councillor Bailão. The motion passes unanimously.
Perfect. So that's the item on our agenda. Could I ask if there is any other business any committee member would like to bring forward? No. So if there's no additional business, then can I ask for a motion to terminate this public meeting of BIFAC? Nick's putting up both hands.
And Councillor Bailão?
Yes. All right.
And could I ask for a show of hands, all in favor?
To you, the chair, Councillor Bailão, Mr. Smith, Ms. Coombs, and Mr. McCray.
Okay, and I'll say goodbye to all those thousands of people who have been watching this live streaming of the BIFAC committee of TCHC.
And thank you, directors, for attending and your attention. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Have a good day.